The Vex Accords were etched in plasma-scorched steel and the silent graves of 1 billion humans. We were forbidden from constructing vessels of war, a simple, brutal edict handed down by the chitinous Vex Imperium after our disastrous first encounter with the galaxy. The war had been short, a mere 2 years that felt like a century of unending loss, and it had left humanity a broken, vassal species. We were deemed too volatile, too instinctively aggressive to be trusted with the tools of interstellar conflict. Our ingenuity in the face of their overwhelming numbers had terrified them, so they had taken our fangs, grounding our fleets and melting our shipyards into slag. The treaty, signed on bended knee by the last remnants of Earth's leadership, confined us to our home system and a handful of pre-war colonies, all under the ever-present, multifaceted gaze of Vex patrols. They thought they had neutered us, turned a race of explorers and warriors into compliant servants, content to live out our days on the scraps they allowed us. For 50 years, we let them believe it. My world wasn't Earth, with its manicured continents and supervised skies. My world was the Ashen Veil, a vast, stellar graveyard where the final battle of the war had been fought, was a chaotic nebula of shredded metal, fractured hulls, and the frozen, silent husks of the fleets that had tried to defend us. The Vex, in their cold, insectoid pragmatism, saw no value in the Veil. It was a navigational hazard, a tomb filled with ghosts and radiation. But for them, it was also a perfect prison. They granted us salvage rights, a condescending gesture they believed would keep us busy, picking through the bones of our own defeat like carrion birds. They saw my salvage operation, a sprawling network of rigs and repurposed asteroids, as the pathetic last gasp of human industry. They saw me, Kalen, as the chief junker, a man content to grow old managing scrap heaps. They were wrong. Every gram of refined armor plate, every salvaged power conduit, every intact targeting sensor my crews pulled from those wrecks was a lie. We weren't salvaging, we were resurrecting. Deep inside the hollowed-out core of a shattered moonlet we called Erebus, hidden behind cascading sensor baffles and layers of mundane industrial clutter, lay our secret. We were rebuilding a fleet, not from scratch, which the Accords forbade, but from the dead. Project Lazarus was a heresy of engineering, a 30-year conspiracy of whispers and smuggled components. Our flagship, the centerpiece of this impossible dream, was the husk of the HCS Retribution, the largest dreadnought humanity had ever built. A ship that had taken 1,000 Vex cruisers with it before its spine was broken in the final battle. We had towed its corpse into Erebus piece by agonizing piece over a decade, and now its skeletal frame was slowly being given new life. Its dead reactors were being replaced with radical new designs. Its empty weapon ports were being fitted with technologies the Vex couldn't even imagine. Reverse engineered and perfected in the dark. It was a ghost, a metal specter we were clothing in the flesh of defiance. The Vex patrol cutter, Vorlog's Vigil, dropped out of warp without warning, its sleek, obsidian hull a stark contrast to the twisted wreckage surrounding my main processing rig. Station 7, Prefect Vorlog was a particularly arrogant example of his species. A towering insectoid whose rigid posture and condescending clicks always set my teeth on edge. He enjoyed these surprise inspections, enjoyed the way his armored guards would stomp through our corridors, their presence a constant reminder of our subjugation. Lena, my lead pilot and de facto second-in-command, watched the cutter's approach on the main view screen, her knuckles white as she gripped the console. She was born after the war, a child of the Accords, and she burned with a restless fire that both inspired and terrified me. She had never known defeat, only its bitter aftermath, and she saw the Vex not as conquerors, but as jailers. "He's early," she hissed, her voice tight. "The scheduled inspection isn't for another 3 weeks." I kept my own voice calm. A placid lake over a churning abyss. Prefects don't follow schedules, Lena. They follow whims. Keep the outer shell looking busy. Route all non-essential power from Erebus to the smelters. Make us look desperate for our quotas. I felt the familiar thrum as the station's massive power relays shifted. The deep hum of the hidden moonlit fading as the external forges roared to life, bathing the surrounding wreckage in a hellish orange glow. Vorlag's shuttle docked with a jarring clang. I met him in the main receiving bay, forcing a weary, deferential smile. Prefect Vorlag, an unexpected honor. His multifaceted eyes, 1,000 black lenses, seemed to analyze me from every angle at once. His translator, a small disc on his chest, converted his series of clicks and whistles into a sterile, synthesized voice. "Kalen, your output has increased by 3% this cycle. An anomaly." I managed a tired shrug. "A lucky find. A Vex destroyer with its reactor shielding mostly intact. The refined metals were a boon." Vorlag tilted his head, a gesture of deep suspicion. "Show me." The tour was a carefully choreographed ballet of deception. We led him through the clangor and heat of the smelters, past mountains of raw, unprocessed scrap. We showed him our meticulously falsified production logs, every number massaged to show a struggling but compliant operation. His guards were intrusive, shoving workers aside, running scanners over bulkheads. One of them got too close to a sealed corridor that led to one of the primary transport tunnels to Erebus. Lena moved to intercept him, her hand drifting toward the plasma cutter on her hip. I caught her eye, giving a subtle shake of my head. Instead, I stepped in front of the guard, my body blocking the corridor. "Forgive the mess, Prefect," I said, addressing Vorlag but keeping my attention on the guard. "We had a coolant leak in that section. It's still venting toxic particulates. Unsafe, even for your men." Vorlag stared at the corridor for a long moment, his antenna twitching. I could feel the sweat trickle down my spine. The entire project, 3 decades of secret toil, could end right here because of a single locked door. Finally, he clicked an order, and the guard stepped back. "Your maintenance standards are as shoddy as your species' honor," the prefect rasped. The insult was a physical blow, but I absorbed it, bowing my head slightly. "We do our best with what the Imperium allows." "Prefect." He seemed to lose interest then, convinced once more of our pathetic state. He finished his inspection with a cursory glance at the loading bays before departing, leaving behind a lingering sense of violation and the sharp, ozone smell of his species. The moment his shuttle undocked, Lena slammed her fist into a control panel. "We can't keep this up. Kalen, one day his whim will be to scan that corridor. One day they'll notice the energy fluctuations from Erebus, no matter how well we mask them. We're building an arsenal that we're too afraid to use." "Patience, Lena," I murmured, my gaze drifting toward the star chart, toward the distant glimmer of the colony world, Cygnus X1. "An arsenal is useless if you reveal it before it's loaded. We are close, but we are not ready. Another 5 years. The reactors for the Retribution, now the Leviathan, need to be calibrated. The kinetic railgun prototypes are still unstable." My words felt hollow even to me. 5 years felt like another lifetime under the Vex boot. That night, the message came. It was a ghost on the quantum entanglement network, a tightly coded burst hidden within a routine shipping manifest from the Cygnus colony. It was a cry for help. The Vex Imperium had declared Cygnus X1 a lush world that had been seeded by humanity a century before the war, to be underutilized. Their solution was demographic restructuring. It was a sterile, bureaucratic term for genocide. They were moving the 2 million human inhabitants to a barren rock on the edge of the system and claiming Cygnus for their own expanding hive. The message contained sensor readings of the Vex resettlement fleet that had just arrived in orbit, 3 heavy cruisers and a dozen support frigates. They weren't an escort, they were an occupation force. We all gathered in the hidden command center within the Leviathan's partially finished bridge. The cavernous space was a mess of exposed wiring and uninstalled consoles, but the main view screen was active, showing the tactical display of the Cygnus system. The desperate plea from the colonial governor echoed in the tense silence. They have given us 1 week to evacuate. We do not have the ships. This is not a resettlement. It is an extermination order. For God's sakes, is anyone out there? Lena's voice was a low, dangerous tremor. This is it. Kalen. This is the line. We let them wipe out 2 million people, or we fight. What is the point of all this? She gestured around at the skeletal warship. If we let our people die, a grizzled engineer named Jax, who had served on the original Retribution and lost his entire family in the war, shook his head. The Leviathan is a ghost. Kid, her heart is barely beating. We fire up the main drive now. We risk a reactor breach that could vaporize this entire moonlet. The railguns have never been test-fired at full power, and the other ships, the 30 frigates and dozen destroyers we've cobbled together from the graveyard, they're barely space-worthy, let alone combat-ready. Their shields are a patchwork. Their weapon systems are jury-rigged. It would be suicide. The debate raged for hours, a microcosm of the conflict within my own soul. The plan had always been to wait, to build our strength until we were an undeniable force. A fleet so powerful we could meet the Vex on our own terms and shatter their Imperium. To act now would be to throw away 50 years of sacrifice on a desperate gamble. But as I looked at the faces around me, Lena's fiery indignation, Jax's weary pragmatism, the quiet determination of 100 other technicians and pilots, I realized the choice had already been made for us. We had built this fleet not just to win a war, but to remember what it meant to be human. It meant we didn't stand by while others suffered. It meant we fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves. It meant that sometimes you had to stand and face the storm, even if you knew it would break you. I walked to the forward viewport, a temporary plate of reinforced plasteel that looked out into the cavern of Erebus. Beyond it, I could just make out the shapes of the smaller ships, the junk fleet, as Lena called them, nestled in their hidden bays, silent and waiting. They weren't pretty. They were ugly, asymmetrical things, scarred with the wounds of a lost war. But they were ours, they were our anger, our hope, our defiance made manifest in salvage steel. I turned back to the command center, my decision solidifying into a cold, hard certainty. Lena, get to your ship, the stray dog. I want your squadron of interceptors ready to fly point. And her eyes widened in disbelief, then blazed with triumph. I looked at Jax. Jax, I don't care how you do it, but I want the Leviathan's primary reactor online in 1 hour. Divert all power from the rest of the Veil. I want every light in this graveyard to go dark, except for ours. Jax opened his mouth to protest, then saw the look on my face and simply nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. He turned and began barking orders into his comm unit. I keyed the fleet-wide channel, my voice echoing through the hidden bays and secret workshops scattered across the Ashen Veil. This is Kalen. Project Lazarus is now active. All crews to their stations. This is not a drill." A moment of stunned silence followed. Then a cacophony of confirmations erupted over the network. Throughout the nebula, 1,000 sleeping ghosts began to stir. I looked at the tactical map of Cygnus, at the cold, predatory icons of the Vex cruisers. They had no idea what was coming. They believed we were broken. They believed we were junkers, scavengers picking at the bones of our past. They had forgotten that even a junkyard dog has teeth. "Set a course for Cygnus HFY," I said, my voice resonating with the low, rising groan of the Leviathan's ancient frame as, for the first time in 50 years, power flooded its veins. It's time to remind the galaxy why they were so afraid of us in the first place. The low thrum of the awakening ship vibrated up through the deck plates, a promise and a threat. The first note in a symphony of impossible war. The order to activate Project Lazarus sent a seismic shock through the hidden ecosystem of the Ashen Veil. For 3 decades, our existence had been defined by stealth and subterfuge, a quiet, simmering rebellion hidden beneath the veneer of industrial salvage. Now, the quiet was shattered. On the bridge of the Leviathan, the world became a symphony of controlled chaos. Jax's voice, raw and strained, crackled over the internal comm, a litany of technical blasphemies and desperate pleas to long-dead engineers. "I'm rerouting the primary coolant loop through the starboard plasma vents. It's going to get hot. People, if you see a bulkhead glowing cherry red, that's normal, probably." The lights on the bridge flickered violently as the moonlit Erebus shunted its entire power grid into the warship's awakening heart. Consoles that had been dark for 50 years flickered to life, displaying streams of archaic code and diagnostic warnings that scrolled by in a waterfall of red. The ship groaned around us, the sound of a waking giant stretching ancient, metal limbs. It was a sound of protest, of immense stress, but beneath it was a deep, resonant hum, the thrum of a caged god finally being unshackled. Down in the launch bays, the rest of our ghost fleet was stirring. In the cockpit of the Stray Dog, Lena ran through her pre-flight diagnostics, her fingers dancing across the controls with an intimacy born of countless hours in the simulator. Her ship, like her squadron of 12 interceptors, was a Frankenstein's monster, built around the stripped-down chassis of an old Earth atmospheric fighter, but armed with salvaged Vex pulse cannons and an experimental human-designed stealth generator that made it a ghost on most sensor arrays. "Wraith Squadron, check in," she commanded, her voice crisp and alive with an energy that seemed to crackle through the comms. One by one, her pilots responded, their voices a mix of nervous excitement and grim resolve. They were the children of the Veil, the best and brightest of the generation born in the shadow of defeat. And they were hungry. The great, camouflaged bay doors of Erebus, disguised as a sheer rock face, began to retract with a low, grinding shudder, revealing the star-dusted void for the first time. The Leviathan moved first. There was nothing elegant about it. The massive dreadnought, nearly 3 kilometers long, eased out of its cradle with the ponderous, complaining grace of a mountain being forced to move. Its hull was a patchwork of mismatched alloys, some gleaming with fresh fabrication, others scarred and pitted from the battle that had killed it half a century ago. It was ugly, asymmetrical, and utterly terrifying. Following in its wake came the rest of the fleet, a ghostly mob emerging from a dozen hidden hangars scattered throughout the nebula. Destroyers with oversized engines bolted to their spines, frigates bristling with jury-rigged weapon pods, and heavy corvettes whose designs had been sketched on napkins and built with sheer, bloody-minded determination. We were a fleet of phantoms, a parade of impossible ships crewed by the ghosts of a dead nation. And as we slipped out of the ashen veil, leaving its familiar wreckage behind, not a single Vex sensor net registered our passing. We were nothing more than a gravitational anomaly, a ripple in the background radiation of the nebula. And then we were gone. The journey to Cygnus X1 was a trial by fire. The Leviathan's experimental warp drive, a theoretical design salvaged from a research vessel and scaled up with reckless ambition, engaged with a gut-wrenching shudder that made the very atoms of the ship feel like they were being torn apart. Alarms blared across the bridge, a chorus of shrieking sirens that threatened to overwhelm us. Inertial dampeners are fluctuating at 60% heat, the helm officer yelled, his hands fighting the controls as the ship bucked like a wild animal. Structural integrity is dropping in the aft sections. Jax, what in the hell is going on? I demanded, my knuckles white on the arms of the command chair. His face, slick with sweat, appeared on a secondary screen. The power draw from the drive is destabilizing the containment fields. I'm trying to compensate, but this thing wasn't designed for a hull with this much structural trauma. Give me a minute for a terrifying moment that stretched into an eternity. The universe outside the view screen dissolved into a nauseating smear of color, and the ship screamed in protest. Then, with a final, violent lurch, the vibration subsided, and the alarms quieted to a handful of insistent, but manageable, beeps. We were in warp, hurtling through the non-space between stars. The rest of the fleet reported in, each with their own litany of malfunctions and near disasters. The Grendel, one of our heaviest destroyers, had lost its primary shield generator. 2 frigates had to drop out of warp to contain engine fires before rejoining the formation. We were a fleet held together by faith, fury, and Jax's desperate genius. I leaned back in my chair, the immense weight of the last 50 years, of the 2 million lives hanging in the balance, pressing down on me. I was sitting in the command chair of the HCS Retribution, the very seat from which Admiral Thorne had directed the last stand of humanity. I could almost feel his ghost at my shoulder, watching, judging. Was this a worthy continuation of his sacrifice, or a fool's errand that would only add our names to the long list of the dead? All Wraith elements are stable and holding formation. Lena's voice cut through my thoughts, a sharp, clear signal in the noise. We're running hot, but we're ready for a fight. Stay sharp, Wraith leader, I replied, my voice more weary than I intended. Eagerness gets you killed. Discipline is what brings you home. Discipline kept us in a graveyard for 50 years. Kaylin, she shot back, her tone bordering on insubordinate. It's time for a little eagerness. Before I could respond, she cut the channel. She was right, of course, but the burden of command was to see not just the fire of the charge, but the price of it. We dropped out of warp on the far side of Cygnus's outermost gas giant, a swirling behemoth of methane and ammonia that provided perfect cover. We ran cold, venting no heat, emitting no energy, drifting on momentum alone. On the main view screen, Cygnus X1 was a beautiful blue and white marble, a heartbreaking reminder of the Earth we had lost, and circling it, like vultures, were the Vex, 3 heavy cruisers, their shapes the cold, insectoid perfection of a species that had evolved for war, formed a tight orbital cordon. A dozen smaller frigates moved in lazy, predictable patrol patterns, their arrogance palpable even from millions of kilometers away. They were a garrison, not an armada, on high alert. They believed their presence alone was enough to ensure compliance. They weren't looking for a fight. They were supervising an extermination. For hours, we watched, gathering data, analyzing their patrol routes, their communication frequencies, their shield modulation. They were textbook, efficient, and utterly without imagination. Their greatest strength, their rigid, unyielding discipline, was about to become their greatest weakness. I gathered my command staff on the bridge holo table. Lena, patched in from her cockpit, appeared as a shimmering blue avatar. Their frigates are on long, sweeping patrols, I began, tracing a line on the holographic map of the system. They're overconfident. They leave significant gaps in their sensor coverage, especially on the ecliptic plane. A frontal assault is still suicide, Jack stated, his avatar grim. Those heavy cruisers can slag this entire fleet before we get within firing range of the planet. And the Leviathan's railguns. Kalen, the power conduits are still unstable. At full charge, we might get one shot before they melt. Maybe two, if we're lucky and I'm a miracle worker. And then one shot is what we'll get? I said. We don't fight their battle, we make them fight ours. Cygnus has a dense inner asteroid belt. The Vex charts label it a navigational hazard and their patrols avoid it. For us, it's a hunting ground. The plan took shape. A desperate, chaotic strategy built on misdirection and human unpredictability. Lena, I said, looking at her avatar, your wraiths are the key. You are the bait. You'll make a high-velocity burn from behind the gas giant, straight toward the planet. You'll look like a meteor shower on their long-range sensors, until it's too late. I want you to draw their frigates away from the cruisers. Lena's avatar grinned. A hornet's nest. I like it. Where do you want me to lead them? Into the belt, I said, highlighting the densest section. Once you're in there, you go to ground. Vanish. While they're hunting for you in the rocks, our destroyers, the Reavers, will be waiting. My finger traced a new path on the map. The Reavers will ambush them, hit and run tactics, cause as much chaos as possible. The Vex cruisers will have to respond to the threat to their screen. They'll move to support their frigates. And that, I said, my gaze hardening, is when we introduce them to the Leviathan. It was a plan with 1,000 things that could go wrong. It relied on Vex predictability, on the skill of Lena's pilots, and on the hope that our patchwork fleet could survive a direct engagement with superior warships. It was a madman's gamble. It was perfect. I gave the final orders, the commands rippling through our silent fleet. In the darkness behind the gas giant, engine signatures flared to life. Wraith Squadron, you are weapons hot. Lena's voice was a low, steady hum in my ear. Let's go rattle the hive. On the view screen, I watched 13 small icons detach from our formation, accelerating at an impossible speed. A volley of arrows aimed at the heart of the Vex occupation. They streaked across the void, silent and deadly. Minutes crawled by. Then, a flicker on the tactical display. The Vex had seen them. One of their frigates. Then another. Broke formation, their icons turning to intercept the strange, high-speed anomaly. The trap was sprung. The Vex were taking the bait. My hand hovered over the master firing control for the Leviathan's main weapon, a weapon that had not been fired in 50 years, a weapon whose very existence was a death sentence. The low hum of the ship around me seemed to rise in pitch, a predator's growl held in check. Patience, I whispered to myself, my eyes locked on the tactical display as the Vex frigates charged blindly toward the asteroid belt. Just a little longer. The tactical display on the Leviathan's bridge was a silent, lethal ballet. The icons representing Lena's Wraith squadron plunged toward the Vex patrol screen like a volley of daggers. As predicted, the Vex reacted with rigid, textbook precision. First 4, then 6. Then a full 8 of their frigates broke their orbital guard patterns and surged to intercept what their sensors were likely screaming was an incoming swarm of high-yield missiles or kinetic impactors. Their arrogance was our greatest ally. They couldn't conceive of a direct attack from a species they had deemed neutered, so they interpreted the threat through the lens of their own tactical doctrines. "They're falling for it," the helm officer breathed, his voice a mix of awe and terror. "They're pulling their screen completely out of position." "Stay focused," I commanded, my own heart hammering against my ribs. "Jax, status on the railguns." Jax's face appeared on a side screen, his expression a mask of intense concentration. The background behind him was a shower of sparks from a protesting power conduit. "She's charging. Kalen, the magnetic containment is holding, but the capacitors are screaming bloody murder. We're at 70%. I can give you one shot now, but it'll be underpowered. Give me 5 more minutes for full yield discharge, and I can't promise the firing chamber won't melt into slag." "You have 5 minutes," I said, the words feeling like a death sentence for his engineering crew. On the main screen, Lena's squadron reached the outer edge of the asteroid belt. The Vex frigates were closing fast, firing bolts of brilliant green plasma that splashed harmlessly against the tumbling rocks. The Wraiths, their experimental stealth generators engaged, were ghosts, their sensor profiles flickering in and out of existence as they expertly weaved through the debris field. "Wraith leader to Leviathan," Lena's voice crackled, laced with the static of the belt's electromagnetic interference. "We've drawn them in. The water's warm." "Understood, Wraith leader," I replied. "The Reavers are in position. Execute Phase 2 on your mark." I watched as the 8 Vex frigates, obsessed with their prey, plunged headlong into the asteroid field, their disciplined formation fracturing as they struggled to navigate the treacherous terrain. It was a place Vex doctrine abhorred: chaotic, unpredictable, and anathema to their rigid fleet tactics. I switched my comms to the destroyer commander, a hard-bitten veteran named Marcus Thorne, Admiral Thorne's grandson. "Reaver lead, the board is set. Begin the harvest." "With pleasure, Leviathan." Marcus's voice was a low growl of anticipation. From the deep shadows of larger asteroids, a dozen human destroyers, our Reaver squadron, suddenly flared their engines to life. They were ugly, brutalist ships, built for brawling, not for beauty. They fell upon the Vex frigates from their flanks and rear, a wolf pack savaging a scattered herd of cattle. Salvaged plasma cannons and newly designed kinetic launchers spat fire, tearing into the weaker rear armor of the Vex ships. The pristine void of the asteroid belt erupted into a maelstrom of explosions and flashing energy beams. On the Leviathan's bridge, we watched the icons of the Vex frigates flicker as they took damage. One winked out entirely, its signature vanishing in a bloom of expanding debris. Another began to tumble, its engines clearly disabled. The Vex were caught completely off guard, right? Their command structure thrown into chaos as they tried to fight in a 3-dimensional battlefield for which they were utterly unprepared. The bait and switch was working perfectly. On the far side of the planet, the 3 Vex heavy cruisers, now deprived of more than half their screening force, began to react. Their icons on the tactical display shifted, turning away from their orbital positions to move toward the asteroid belt. Their commanders finally realizing this was not a random missile attack, but a coordinated ambush. "They're moving," the tactical officer announced, stating the obvious. Course and speed indicate they intend to support their frigates. Let them come, I murmured. I turned my attention to the railgun status display. 95%. The entire ship around us vibrated with the colossal amount of energy being contained within its magnetic heart. Jax, I need that shot. You've got it, he yelled back over the comm. But fire it now, or the whole damn weapon is going to detonate. Capacitor integrity is critical. Helm, bring us about. Target their lead cruiser. The chitinous resolve, I commanded. Charge main weapon. The Leviathan turned with agonizing slowness, its massive frame pivoting in the void. On the view screen, the distant shapes of the Vex cruisers grew larger, their sleek, obsidian forms bristling with menace. The lead ship was a monster, a testament to Vex martial engineering. A targeting reticle appeared on the screen, locking onto its center of mass. A high-pitched whine filled the bridge, escalating in frequency until it felt like a physical pressure against my skull. The railgun was at peak charge. Solution locked, the tactical officer confirmed. Weapons free. My hand closed over the firing stud, a simple, unassuming button that held the culmination of 50 years of defiance. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. The weight of that single action, of plunging humanity back into a galactic war, pressing down on me. Then I thought of the 2 million souls on the planet below, of the billion graves from the last war, and I pressed the button. There was no sound, only a profound, ship-shuddering lurch as a projectile the size of a shuttle, a dense rod of refined osmium, was accelerated to a significant fraction of the speed of light. On the screen, we saw a flicker, a momentary distortion in space-time, and then a thin, impossibly bright line of light crossed the millions of kilometers separating us from the Vex fleet in an instant. The effect on the chitinous resolve was absolute. The kinetic energy of the impact was so immense that it didn't just punch a hole in the Vex cruiser. The ship simply ceased to exist in a coherent form. One moment it was there, a proud symbol of Imperium might. The next, it was a rapidly expanding cloud of incandescent plasma and vaporized metal. There was a moment of stunned silence on the bridge, broken only by the frantic warnings from engineering. Massive energy feedback. The firing conduit has melted. The railgun is offline. I repeat, the main gun is offline. Jack screamed over the comm. The two remaining Vex cruisers, their commanders surely reeling in shock from the instantaneous, unannounced destruction of their flagship, faltered. Their advance slowed, their perfect formation broken. For the first time in their history, a human vessel had not only engaged them, but had outranged and utterly annihilated one of their capital ships with a single, contemptuous shot. But they were Vex. Shock quickly gave way to cold, insectoid fury. They recovered, their weapon ports glowing as they locked onto our position. Incoming fire! The helm officer shouted. The void between us lit up as hundreds of plasma bolts and particle beams lanced across space. Evasive maneuvers, all-point defense cannons. Fire at will, divert all available power to the forward shields. I roared. The Leviathan lumbered, trying to present its thickest armor to the storm. Explosions rocked the ship as the first Vex volleys found their mark. The shields, a patchwork of human and salvaged Vex technology, flared brilliantly, absorbing the brunt of the assault. But they flickered and died under the sustained barrage. Metal screamed as plasma bolts boiled away layers of armor plating. Red lights flashed across the bridge, damage reports scrolling too fast to read. Hull breach in Sector Gamma decompression. We've lost the port engine nacelle. Shields are gone, we're taking direct hits. We were a giant, wounded beast, and the Vex were closing in for the kill. We had fired our one silver bullet, and now we were facing the consequences. We were too big, too slow, and too damaged to outrun them. "Launch all fighters and bombers," I ordered, my voice strained. "Marcus, your reavers are to disengage from the frigates and hit those cruisers from the flank. Draw their fire. Give us room to breathe." "We're on our way. Leviathan," he responded, his voice grim. "But we won't last long against their main batteries." This was the crux of the gamble. The Leviathan had been the hammer, but now it was the anvil. Its purpose was to draw the full, undivided attention of the Vex capital ships, to absorb their wrath and hold their focus, giving the rest of our smaller, more agile fleet the freedom to bleed them to death. "Lena, where are you?" I broadcast on a private channel. The asteroid belt was a chaotic mess of dogfights and dying ships. "Giving them hell," her voice came back, punctuated by the roar of her cannons. "We've crippled 3 more of their frigates, but the rest have regrouped. They're boxing us in. I need you to break free," I said, my mind racing. "I need you at the planet. The planet Kalen. The fight is out here. The fight is for the people on that world." "Lena," I countered, my voice sharp. "The Vex are broadcasting a planetary ultimatum. They're preparing to begin orbital bombardment in response to our attack. They're going to glass the capital city. Get down there. I don't care how you do it. Coordinate with the Planetary Defense Force. Protect the evacuation zones. Buy those people time. That is your primary objective now." There was a pause. For a moment, I thought she would argue that her warrior's instinct would refuse to let her leave the main battle. But when she spoke, her voice was stripped of its earlier bravado, replaced by a cold, sober understanding of the stakes. "Understood. Kalen, I'm on my way. Wraith Squadron is breaking off. Give 'em hell for us." "We will," I promised. I watched her squadron's icons peel away from the melee in the asteroid belt and streak toward the blue marble of Cygnus X1. On the main view screen, the 2 Vex heavy cruisers loomed, their weapons firing in a relentless and a punishing rhythm. The Leviathan shuddered under another direct hit, the lights on the bridge flickering and dying, plunging us into the red glow of emergency lighting. "We're not going to survive this, are we?" the young helm officer asked, his voice shaking. I looked at the terrifying, beautiful spectacle of the battle raging outside, at the reavers darting in like angry wasps, at the silent, implacable advance of the Vex. "Survival was never the primary objective," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the dim, red light of the dying bridge. "Victory is..." The bridge of the Leviathan was a Boschian hellscape of red emergency lighting, arcing electricity, and the choking smell of burnt wiring. The ship was dying. Every impact from the Vex cruisers sent a terminal shudder through its ancient frame, a death rattle that echoed in the bones of every crew member. A gaping wound had been torn in the port side, and through it, I could see the cold, indifferent stars. We were an anvil, and the Vex hammers were relentless. We had bought time, but the currency was the lives of my crew and the very existence of my ship. Report," I barked into the comm, my voice hoarse from the smoke. "We've lost the Grendel and the Fury." His voice came back, strained and full of static. "We've managed to knock out the primary weapon arrays on one of the cruisers, but the other is still at full strength. We can't keep this up. Kalen, they're cutting us to pieces." "Just hold them a little longer," I urged, though I knew it was an impossible request. Victory couldn't be won by attrition. We had neither the numbers nor the armor for it. It had to be won by changing the fundamental nature of the fight. The Vex saw us as a single, high-value target. They were focused, their insectoid minds locked onto the total destruction of the Leviathan. And in that focus, in that rigid and predictable rage, lay their vulnerability. "Jax," I said, switching to the engineering channel, "I need a status on our secondary reactors." "The secondary reactors, they're stable. For now, it's the primary containment that's about to go critical from the damage we're taking." "Why are you asking about the secondaries?" "Because I want you to overload them," I said, my voice dangerously calm. There was a stunned silence on the other end, then an explosion of protest. "Overload them, Kalen? That's insane. The feedback would blow the entire forward third of the ship to Kingdom Come. It would be a controlled demolition of our own command section." "Precisely," I said, looking at the two Vex cruisers on the tactical display as they began a slow, deliberate pincer movement. "They're expecting a warship's death rattle, a final, futile barrage before our main reactor breaches, and they're not expecting a ghost to tear its own heart out. I want you to channel the entire overload into a directed energy pulse, straightforward. It won't be a weapon in the traditional sense. It'll be a massive, chaotic wave of pure electromagnetic and kinetic energy. A shotgun blast of our own dying guts." "It's suicide," Jax whispered, the fight gone from his voice. "It's an option," I corrected him gently, "and it's the only one we have left. Do it." As Jax began the terrifying work of turning our ship into a bomb, I watched Lena's squadron approach the planet. From her perspective, relayed to a side monitor, Cygnus X1 was a world under siege. Lances of searing green energy, thick as city blocks, descended from the Vex cruisers, impacting the surface with silent, apocalyptic fury. The planet's thin atmospheric shield shimmered and buckled around each impact zone, but it was failing. I could see the continent below lighting up with the fire of a dying world. "Leviathan, this is Wraith Leader." Lena's voice was tight with a barely controlled rage. "I'm seeing multiple high-energy impacts around the planetary capital. The bombardment has begun. Their planetary defense grid is gone. They're defenseless down there." Her cockpit view swerved as she dodged a volley of point defense fire from the nearest cruiser. "I can't stop them from this range. Their shields are too strong for my cannons." "Don't attack the ship. Lena, attack the weapon," I said, my mind crystallizing the final piece of the plan. "The beam emitters, Deadshi, they have to be exposed to fire. They'll be heavily defended, but they're a weak point. A surgical strike could disable one." "It's a suicide run," she stated flatly, echoing Jax's words. "The galaxy is full of them today." I replied, "Create a diversion. Give the people on the ground a chance. That's all that matters now." "Copy that, Leviathan," she said. There was a new, hard edge to her voice. "Wraith Squadron, form on me. We're going hunting." Back on the Leviathan, a new klaxon began to sound, a deep, mournful tone that signified an imminent reactor breach. This one, however, was a lie, a carefully orchestrated symphony of our own destruction. "The secondary reactors are at 150% and climbing," Jax reported, his voice grim. "The containment vessels will rupture in 90 seconds. It's been an honor, Kalen." "The honor was mine, Jax," I said. I opened a fleet-wide channel, my voice ringing out across the battered Reaver squadron and Lena's interceptors. "This is Kalen. To all human ships, The Leviathan is compromised. We are enacting the Lazarus Protocol. Do not approach. I repeat, do not approach. It was a code we had invented years ago, a fiction for a scenario just like this. It meant the ship was lost, its reactor going critical, and that all other ships should save themselves. To the Vex, who were undoubtedly monitoring our communications, it would be the final, pathetic admission of our defeat. Helm, final command, I said, my eyes fixed on the approaching cruisers. All remaining power to the forward thrusters. Take us right between them. The helm officer, a young man with terror and resolve warring in his eyes, nodded silently. The wounded Dreadnought surged forward, a behemoth on its final suicidal charge. The Vex, ideating our approach and hearing our frantic warnings, reacted exactly as I knew they would. Their disciplined, cautious mind saw a ship on the verge of a catastrophic reactor explosion. Instead of pressing their attack, they began to pull back, their thrusters firing to create distance from the anticipated blast zone. They were giving us the very opening we needed. As we closed the distance, Lena began her attack, her 12 wraiths, flying in a tight, weaving formation, dove toward the nearest cruiser, their cannons blazing. They were gnats attacking a Leviathan, their fire splashing uselessly against the main shields. But they weren't aiming for the hull. They were a distraction, drawing the attention of the Vex Point defense turrets. 10 seconds. Jax's voice counted down in my ear. We were perfectly positioned between the two massive enemy ships. On the view screen, I could see the intricate details of their chitinous hulls. 3, 2, 1. I didn't give a final order. There was no need. Jax triggered the overload. The world outside the view screen vanished in a silent, blinding flash of pure white light. The forward third of the Leviathan simply disintegrated, not in an explosion of fire and shrapnel, but in a wave of raw, uncontained energy. The ship behind me was torn apart, a violent, unstoppable force unleashed from within. The bridge was ripped from its moorings, and my last sensation was of being thrown into a maelstrom of screaming metal and annihilating light. From Lena's cockpit, the detonation of the Leviathan was a second sun igniting in the void. The massive energy pulse, exactly as Kalen had planned, slammed into the two Vex cruisers at point-blank range. It wasn't an explosion they could shield against. It was a wave of pure electromagnetic chaos. Their shields, designed to stop plasma and kinetic rounds, overloaded and shattered instantly. Their system shorted out. Their hulls were flash-heated and structurally compromised. The cruiser on the right, the one the Reavers had already damaged, suffered a catastrophic series of internal explosions, its spine breaking as its own reactor went critical. It bloomed into a silent, expanding fireball. The other cruiser, the one Lena was targeting, was crippled. Its lights flickered, its engines died, and, most importantly, the brilliant green lance of its orbital bombardment weapon sputtered and went dark. The raw energy of the Leviathan's death throes had done what our weapons could not. In that single, critical moment of Vex chaos, as the cruiser's point defense grid went offline, Lena saw her chance. All wraiths, on me, target the primary beam emitter fire. Everything. Her squadron dove. Unmolested by defensive fire, they unleashed their entire payloads of plasma torpedoes and kinetic penetrators into the massive, now exposed focusing lens of the Vex weapon. The emitter glowed, buckled, and then shattered in a cascade of emerald green energy. The bombardment was over. The surviving Vex cruiser, battered and crippled, its companion destroyed and its primary weapon shattered, did the unthinkable. It began to turn, its emergency thrusters firing in a desperate bid to limp away from the battlefield. For the first time in 50 years, a Vex capital ship was retreating from human forces. Lena pulled her stray dog into a slow climb. Her breathing ragged, she looked at the victorious chaos of the asteroid belt, where the battered Reavers were finishing off the last of the Vex frigates. She looked at the planet below, where millions of lives had been saved. And then she looked at the place where the HCS Leviathan had been. There was nothing left but a vast, expanding cloud of cooling gas and twisted ghostly wreckage. The comm channels were silent. Kalen was gone. They had won the battle for Cygnus X1, but they had lost their architect, their leader, the one man who had held the dream of human defiance together for 50 years. The silence in the void felt less like a victory and more like an epitaph. The silence that followed the battle was more profound than any explosion. In the cockpit of the stray dog, Lena floated amidst a graveyard of ghosts. The victorious shouts of her pilots over the comm had faded, replaced by the grim reality of the cost. Before her, the wreckage of the Leviathan was a shimmering, expanding nebula of its own, a new constellation of sorrow in the Cygnus system. Kalen was gone. The thought was a physical weight, a cold, dense singularity in her chest. The man who had been the architect of their hope, the patient, steady hand guiding their rage for 3 decades, had been consumed by the very fire he had unleashed. The surviving ships of their phantom fleet limped out of the asteroid belt, their hulls scorched and pockmarked, their crews running on adrenaline and grief. Marcus Thorne's destroyer, the Vengeance, its prow mangled but its engines still burning, pulled alongside her small interceptor. His face, projected onto her console, was a mask of weary disbelief. "Wraith Leader," he began, his voice raspy. "Lena, we've done a preliminary count. We lost 7 ships, including the Grendel, almost a third of our fleet. But the Vex, they're gone." The crippled cruiser jumped to warp a few minutes ago. The frigates are either destroyed or have fled. "And Kalen?" Lena asked. Though she already knew the answer, Marcus's gaze fell. No life pods were detected, no signal. The energy release from that pulse. There wouldn't have been anything left to find. He saved us all. Lena, he saved this entire world. The words were true, but they offered no comfort. Below, Cygnus X1 was a wounded but living world. The orbital bombardment had ceased. Millions who had been moments from annihilation were now looking up at a sky free of Vex terror for the first time in their lives. The victory was total, and it felt like a funeral. They convened hours later on the bridge of the Vengeance, the largest surviving vessel and now the de facto flagship of a fleet that had no leader. Lena stood beside Marcus. Jax, who had survived by sealing himself in a reinforced engineering conduit moments before the overload, and the newly elected governor of Cygnus, a woman whose face was etched with both profound gratitude and sheer terror. "We owe you a debt that can never be repaid," the governor said, her voice trembling. "But what happens now? The Vex will return, not with cruisers, but with an armada. They will not allow this defiance to stand. They will come to sterilize this entire planet." "She's right," Marcus said, his arms crossed. "We're in no shape for another fight. Our best course of action is to help evacuate as many key personnel as we can and scatter. Go back to the Veil. Go to ground. Live to fight another day. Run." Lena's voice was sharp, cutting through the pragmatic despair. "We just showed the galaxy that the Vex can bleed, that they can be beaten, And our first act is to run and hide in our junkyard again. Kalen didn't sacrifice himself, sacrifice our flagship, so we could learn how to run better. Kalen was a strategist. Lena, he would know we're overextended, Marcus countered, his frustration boiling over. Look at us. We're a handful of battered ships, low on fuel and munitions, and we've just kicked the biggest hive in the galaxy. He was more than a strategist, Jax interjected, his voice quiet but firm. He held up a data slate. Before he gave me the final order, he initiated a deep-level data purge of the Leviathan's memory banks. All but one file, a broadcast protocol. It wasn't just about the energy wave, the detonation of a ship that size, the unique energy signature of our experimental reactors. It was a beacon. Lena stared at him. A beacon for what? For anyone who was watching. Jax explained. The entire battle, from the first shot to the Leviathan's end, was recorded and compressed into a single, massive data packet. The final pulse of the reactors wasn't just a weapon, it was a broadcast antenna. It pushed that packet out on a broad spectrum, multi-dimensional frequency. It's slow, but it's unstoppable. It will propagate across the entire galactic arm. The bridge fell silent as the true scale of Kalen's final gambit settled over them. He hadn't just been fighting a battle for one world. He had been staging a play for the entire galaxy. He wanted everyone, every subjugated race, every pirate clan, every forgotten colony living in fear to see the impossible, to see the Vex Imperium burn. As if on cue, the comms officer at his station stiffened. Commander Thorne, Governor, I'm picking up something. A high-priority Vex transmission, originating from their core worlds. It's on all their Imperial channels. They're broadcasting it system-wide. Put it on screen, Marcus commanded. The insectoid visage of a Vex Grand Prefect filled the main view screen, its mandibles clicking with cold fury. The synthesized voice was devoid of emotion, which made the words it spoke all the more terrifying. The primitive vermin known as humanity has committed an act of cosmic treason. The colony on Cygnus X1 is hereby declared a center of contagion. The 7th Grand Armada has been dispatched. Its directive is simple total system purification. No vessel will be spared. No life will be permitted to remain. The human stain will be erased. The message ended. The governor turned pale, and even Marcus seemed to shrink under the weight of the decree. The 7th Grand Armada. It was a force of legend, a fleet designed not for occupation, but for annihilation. He knew, Lena whispered, a slow, dawning realization spreading across her face. Kalen knew they would do this. He wasn't just showing the galaxy that the Vex could be beaten. He was showing them what the Vex do when they're scared. He was forcing everyone to choose a side. The comms officer spoke again, his voice now filled with confusion. Sirs, I'm picking up other signals, not Vex. They're coming to us on encrypted, non-standard frequencies. I can't identify the source. Try to decrypt them, Lena ordered, her heart beginning to pound with a new, wild hope. The officer's fingers flew across his console. A moment later, a single, translated text string appeared on the screen. It was written in a harsh, guttural language, but the meaning was clear. Another signal came in, this one in a flowing, elegant script. Then another, and another. A torrent of messages began to flood the comms channels. a cacophony of alien languages and hidden signals from the dark corners of the galaxy, a reptilian race offering warships, a species of silicon-based life forms offering advanced stealth technology, a notorious pirate queen pledging her entire fleet to the humans who kicked the hive. Kalen's beacon had been received. His message had not just been heard, it had been answered. The single spark of defiance at Cygnus X1 had just ignited 1,000 hidden fires across the Vex Imperium. Lena stood before the main view screen, which now showed a tactical map of the surrounding sector. It was no longer just their small or battered fleet against the might of the Vex. New icons, potential allies, were beginning to appear at the edges of the map, ghost signals moving from the darkness into the light. The war was no longer just theirs. She turned to face the assembled officers and the governor of Cygnus. The grief for Kalen was still a raw, open wound, but it was now alloyed with a fierce, burning purpose. He had shown them the way, and his final act had given them a future he would never see. "The 7th Armada is coming," she said, her voice clear and steady, ringing with an authority no one dared question. "Let them come. We won't be here waiting for them. We're going to give them a welcome they'll never forget." She pointed to a strategic choke point on the star chart, a volatile nebula not unlike the Ashen Veil. "We'll make our stand there. Send a reply to every one of those signals. Tell them the human fleet is making its stand at the Serpent's Mouth. Tell them the first battle of the Great Uprising is about to begin." She was no longer just Lena, the hot-headed pilot. She was the inheritor of a dream, the commander of a revolution. Humanity had been a vassal species, content to salvage the bones of its past. Now, they were the unlikely leaders of a galactic war for freedom, and their name would be whispered not as junkers or slaves, but as the ghost fleet that had taught an empire how to fear, a